A stunning woman, Olya, a gifted event planner whose career is built on crafting fairy tale weddings, is about to make magic on a beach where every detail seems perfect. But beneath the surface of her flawless design lies a hidden truth, one she never expected. The groom, Casper, a billionaire with a past intertwined with Olya's heart, is the man who broke her years ago. And now, the past she thought she'd left behind has come back to rewrite her future. As Olya orchestrates the wedding of a lifetime, the emotional whirlwind between her and Casper begins to unravel old wounds, secrets, and a love that never truly died. Betrayal, redemption, and love under the stars await. But will the heartache of yesterday prevent them from finding happiness today? So, get comfortable, dim the lights, and let the story sweep you away. Before we dive in, let us know what you think. On a scale from 0 to 10, how do you think their love story will unfold? Stay with us to find out. Olya stood on the edge of the beach, the warm, golden sun kissing her skin, casting its light over the sprawling scene she had so carefully crafted. The air smelled of salt water and fresh blooms, a soft breeze stirring the strands of her black hair, making it dance in the wind like dark silk. She took in the breathtaking view, a sea of white roses cascading across the sandy shore, arranged with precision, forming an aisle that led to the altar framed by towering arches of delicate florals. Crystal chandeliers hung from invisible strings, their prismatic light scattering the colors of the sunset in dazzling splashes. Everything was perfect, every detail meticulously planned, every arrangement a symbol of her passion for perfection. It was her art, her magic, her masterpiece, an event that would be remembered for years. But today, as the wedding she had spent months preparing for drew near, her mind was far from the beauty of the setup. For the first time in her career, a dark shadow loomed over the pristine canvas she had spent so long creating. The groom was someone she knew too well, someone she never expected to see again. Casper, the man who had broken her heart 5 years ago, stood across the sand, watching the final touches of the ceremony with an air of detached calm. But his presence struck her like a bolt of lightning, jolting her back to a past she'd desperately tried to forget. She hadn't known, she hadn't prepared, and now here he was, dressed in a tailored suit, as perfect as the man she remembered, except for the coldness in his eyes that told her this reunion would be nothing like the ones she had daydreamed about. She had buried those old feelings deep inside, locked away in a corner of her heart. But seeing him now, here, in her world, in this perfect setting, everything came rushing back. The pain, the betrayal, the questions that had never been answered. Her pulse quickened, and for a moment, the bustling activity of her team, the soft melody of the string quartet, and the laughter of arriving guests faded into a dull hum. It was just her and him, and the years that had passed between them felt like they had melted into the air around her, thick and suffocating. She hadn't expected to feel this way, but she wasn't just a wedding planner today. She was a woman whose heart had never really healed. Olya forced herself to breathe, pushing down the rising tide of emotions that threatened to swallow her whole. She was a professional. This was her job. She had worked tirelessly to make sure that this day went off without a hitch, and she would not let her personal history with Casper ruin it. She adjusted a ribbon on one of the floral arches, trying to focus on the task at hand. "Lila, the trellis," she called, her voice calm but with an edge of authority. "Tilted a little to the left." Her team moved quickly, with the practiced ease of people who had worked with her for years. She stood there for a moment, watching the workers fix the final details, the warm, golden light of the evening bathing the scene in an almost surreal glow. As she surveyed the setup, a faint sense of pride bubbled within her, but it was quickly overshadowed by the storm raging inside. This wedding wasn't about her. She wasn't the one getting married. She had to focus. She had to bury the emotions, keep the past locked away. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the reality of the situation. Casper was here, and he was the groom. And she was the woman who had once loved him with everything she had. That part of her life felt like a distant dream now, a painful memory that she had buried under the weight of her success. But the truth was, she had never fully moved on. No one ever really forgets their first love, and Casper had been her first, her everything. The last time they had spoken, he had torn her heart out with those cold words, words that still echoed in her mind. "I have to do this for my family, Olya. We can't be together." She had begged him to stay, to fight for them, but he had walked away without a second glance, leaving her to pick up the pieces of a broken heart. The reason he left still haunted her. She had never gotten the full story. His family was wealthy, and the pressure was immense, but that didn't make the rejection hurt any less. And now, after all this time, here he was, about to marry someone else, someone she didn't even know. Olya's heart clenched, but she forced herself to push those thoughts aside. She had a job to do. She needed to focus. The guests were beginning to arrive, their chatter rising in the air, the sound of high heels tapping against the sand as they moved toward the seating area. The string quartet began to play, and waiters glided by with trays of champagne, adding to the elegance of the evening. Olya turned away from the altar, straightening her back, trying to find some semblance of composure. The delicate scent of roses filled her senses, and she felt the familiar ache in her chest as she watched the petals sway in the wind. The scene was perfect, and yet nothing felt right. Casper's presence lingered like an uninvited guest, casting a shadow over everything she had worked so hard to create. She glanced across the venue again, her eyes searching for him. He was standing near the altar now, talking to some of the guests, his broad shoulders set in that confident way she remembered. He looked even more handsome than she remembered, his sharp features softened by the golden light of the setting sun. She could feel his eyes on her, and when they locked, everything inside her stilled. His gaze held an intensity she hadn't expected, a look that sent a jolt through her entire body. He hadn't changed, and neither had she. But there was no time for this. She couldn't let him distract her, couldn't let him pull her back into the past. Olya forced herself to move, walking briskly to the guestbook table, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. Why hadn't she known he was the groom? Why hadn't she asked for more details? She had been so consumed by the logistics of the event that she hadn't even bothered to check the names on the invitation list. And now, as she looked at the names on the guestbook, she realized just how much she had overlooked. "Caldwell Langley," she murmured under her breath, her heart sinking. The words felt like a blade, cutting through the calm she had tried so hard to maintain. Catherine Langley, the bride, was the woman who had captured the heart of the man she had loved and lost. Olya's hands trembled as she straightened a pen on the table, her mind spinning. She had no time to dwell on the past. She had a wedding to manage, but the truth was inescapable. Casper was here, and the ghosts of their past were about to collide with the present in a way she had never imagined. Olya's heart hammered in her chest as she stood by the guestbook, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. The words, Caldwell Langley, echoed in her mind, and she could feel the sting of betrayal once again, sharp and familiar, like a wound that had never truly healed. The name rang in her ears, and suddenly the beach, the roses, the delicate chandeliers, all of it felt like a cruel mirage. She had spent so many years building herself up, learning to push away the past, but now it was all crashing down on her with the force of a tidal wave. Casper. Her Casper. The man who had once been everything to her, standing in front of her, ready to marry someone else. The man who had left her without a word, without explanation, without a single glance back. She could feel her pulse racing, her hands trembling, but she fought to maintain control, her professional mask slipping back into place. She had to focus. The guests were arriving. The ceremony was about to begin. But how could she do this? How could she orchestrate a perfect moment for him when the man she once loved had shattered her heart into 1,000 pieces? As the guests settled into their seats, Olya caught glimpses of Casper across the way. He was speaking to some of the more important figures, his tall frame a stark contrast against the soft glow of the setting sun. He had changed. She could see that now. His once youthful, carefree demeanor had been replaced by the stern, calculated air of a successful businessman. His sharp jawline, his dark eyes, they were still the same, but there was something about him that felt distant, unreachable. He was no longer the boy she had fallen in love with under the oak trees at college. He was a man now, hardened by time, ambition, and choices she would never understand. And that thought stung deeper than anything else. He was the man who had chosen everything else over her, who had walked away without a second thought, leaving her to pick up the pieces of a shattered future. Olya turned away from the guest book, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she forced herself to focus on the task at hand. The candles had to be lit. The champagne flutes needed to be polished one more time. The details, the tiny, meticulous details, were what kept her grounded in this whirlwind of emotions. She walked across the sand, her heels sinking with each step, the sound of the ocean's waves crashing gently in the distance. It should have been calming, but all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart, the echo of Casper's voice in her memory, the cruel finality of his words ringing in her ears. "We can't be together, Olya. I have to do this for my family." The words she had begged him not to say, the words that had sealed their fate, haunted her for 5 years. She tried to push them away, but the memories came flooding back, unbidden and relentless. She saw herself, younger, hopeful, standing beneath the old oak tree where Casper had kissed her for the first time, promising her a future they would build together. She had believed him, trusted him with everything. And then, just as quickly as he had come into her life, he had torn everything apart. He had chosen his family over her, and she had never understood why. He said it was for his family's company, that his father's business was crumbling, and that the only way to save them was to marry Catherine Langley, the heiress with the money and the connections to keep his family afloat. Olya had begged him to find another way, to fight for them, but it was useless. He had walked away, leaving her standing there, alone and broken, while his life had moved on without her. Olya snapped out of the memory as she approached the altar. The ceremony was almost ready to begin. The guests were seated, and the bride, Catherine, was nowhere to be seen yet. But Olya knew the moment would come soon enough, and when it did, she would have to face Casper again. She didn't know if she was ready. But one thing was certain. She couldn't run away from this. Not now. Not when the pain of the past was so fresh, so raw. She had built her life from the ground up, had turned her heartbreak into success, but she had never fully moved on from Casper. No matter how many beautiful weddings she had orchestrated, no matter how many couples she had helped find their happiness, her own heart still ached for him. And the thought that he was marrying someone else, that his life had moved on while she was left behind, felt like a betrayal all over again. "Everything's ready," Lila's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her back into the present. Olya forced a smile, nodding at her assistant, but her heart wasn't in it. "Perfect," she said, though she barely felt the words pass her lips. She glanced once more at the altar, the space that was meant for a new beginning, a new chapter for someone else. But in that moment, it felt like a tomb for all the hopes and dreams she had once shared with Casper, a tomb for the love that had never truly died. As Olya walked past the altar, Her mind raced with 100 thoughts. How could she make this day perfect for the couple? How could she forget the pain, forget the past, and focus on the future? The truth was, she didn't know if she could. She could fake professionalism. She could bury her emotions deep inside. But she couldn't escape the fact that Casper's presence was like a shadow, casting darkness over the light she had worked so hard to create. And then, as if the universe itself had conspired against her, Casper's gaze found hers again. He was standing near the altar, his eyes locked on her, his face unreadable, and, for a moment, Olya couldn't breathe. Everything in her screamed for her to look away, to move on, but she was frozen in place. And then, the unthinkable happened. He smiled. It wasn't the warm, carefree smile she remembered from years ago. No, it was a smile filled with regret, with a sadness that mirrored her own. And in that moment, she knew. He hadn't forgotten either. He had never stopped caring, but that didn't matter now. He had made his choice. And she had to make hers. Olya swallowed hard, turning away from him before the flood of emotions could swallow her whole. There was no room for that now. Not here, not today. She had a wedding to run. But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning of a story that she hadn't expected to pick up again. And yet here they were, together once more on the beach where everything had started and everything had ended. The wedding ceremony was moving forward, but for Olya, everything had slowed to a crawl. She could hear the soft music of the string quartet blending with the distant hum of the ocean, but it all felt like background noise, a haze that she couldn't break free from. Casper stood near the altar, talking to the guests, his eyes scanning the crowd with a quiet confidence. Every glance from him felt like an electric shock, sending waves of memory crashing over her. She knew the wedding had to go on. She was the professional. But how could she ignore the flood of emotions rising within her? How could she bury the fact that the man she once loved, the man who had torn her heart apart, was here, standing at the threshold of a new life, while she was stuck in the shadow of their past? Olya forced herself to walk back to the front of the venue, where the team was finalizing the last-minute touches. But her every step felt like a battle, her mind too filled with questions to focus. Casper's presence was like an anchor, pulling her back to a time when everything had felt perfect, when they were young and in love, when the world had seemed so certain. She remembered the days at college, when they had talked for hours beneath the old oak tree on the quad, making plans for a future that was supposed to be theirs. She had trusted him with everything, and then he had left. The words that had shattered her still echoed in her mind. "I have to do this for my family, Olya. I can't be with you. You deserve someone who can be there for you." He had walked away, but in doing so, he had taken a piece of her with him. She had spent years building herself back up, pouring everything into her career, into the perfect weddings, into creating magic for other couples. She had told herself she was fine, that she was stronger than before. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had never fully moved on from him. As Olya adjusted the last set of candles near the altar, she felt a sudden presence behind her. Her body tensed instinctively, and before she could turn, she heard the voice she had tried so hard to forget. "Olya." His voice was low, full of emotion. It carried the weight of years, the kind of depth that only comes with time. She didn't turn around, couldn't bring herself to face him just yet. "Please don't do this," Casper continued, his voice breaking through the tension. "I didn't know you were going to be here." Olya's heart fluttered, a painful mixture of surprise and bitterness rising inside her. He didn't know. She had to swallow the anger building in her throat before speaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt, though it cracked at the edges. "Why didn't you think to mention that you were the groom?" She could feel his gaze on her back, and she wondered if he could see the cracks forming beneath her professional exterior. She had worked so hard to keep it all together, but his presence was pulling at the seams of everything she had built. "I never planned for this to happen," Casper said, stepping closer, his words coming in a rush, as if the weight of the truth had finally been too much to carry in silence. "I thought I had buried it all, Olya. But I never stopped loving you. I thought I was doing what was best for you, for my family, but I was wrong. I made a mistake." Olya's pulse quickened as she turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. There he was, so close now, his blue eyes still holding the same intensity, the same ache she remembered. He was older, more polished, but the pain in his gaze was the same. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to ask him how he could walk away so easily, but something stopped her. It was his honesty, the rawness in his voice that made her hesitate. For the first time in years, she saw the man she had once loved, the man who had broken her, standing before her, willing to face the consequences of his actions. "I know you hate me, Olya," Casper whispered, his voice tight with regret. "But I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, not yet. I just wanted you to know the truth." He looked down for a moment as if ashamed to meet her gaze, and Olya's heart twisted painfully. "I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." For a long moment, Olya stood still, the sound of the waves and the distant chatter of the guests fading into a heavy silence. She didn't know what to say. She had spent 5 years telling herself that she was over him, that she had moved on, that it didn't matter anymore. But standing here, in this moment with him so close, she realized how much she had buried, how much had been left unsaid between them. "I never hated you, Casper," she said quietly, her voice softer than she intended. "I hated what you did. I hated that you walked away without a word, without a fight. I hated that you thought you had the right to choose for me." Her words were like a balm on a wound that had never fully healed. She had never had the chance to say all of this before, and now it was all spilling out, whether she wanted it to or not. Casper reached out, his hand hovering in the space between them, as if unsure whether she would let him in. "I can't change the past, Olya," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to build something new with you. I've spent years regretting what I did, and I can't let this moment pass without telling you how sorry I am, how much I still love you." Olya's breath hitched, her heart warring with itself. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to push him away, to tell him that it was too late, that she had moved on. But the truth was, she hadn't. Not really. And as she stood there, looking into the eyes of the man she had once loved, she realized that perhaps love wasn't something you could just throw away. Maybe, just maybe, it was something you had to fight for. She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "You've hurt me, Casper. You can't just come back and expect everything to be the same." Her words were raw, but there was no denying the ache in her chest, the flicker of hope that had never truly gone out. "But I can't ignore what's here between us. Not again." For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them like a fragile thread. Finally, Casper took a slow step toward her, closing the distance between them. His eyes never left hers, and as he reached for her hand, the touch sent a shiver down her spine. "Then let's rebuild," he said quietly, his voice filled with determination. "Let's rebuild us." The next few days passed in a whirlwind. Olya and Casper tried to avoid the looming truth of the situation, both consumed by the overwhelming emotions swirling between them. But reality had a way of forcing itself into the picture. They couldn't outrun the past, not completely. The stolen moments they shared were brief, fleeting. But as each day passed, Olya found herself feeling something she hadn't felt in years: hope. But as the tide of their reunion seemed to rise, another, darker wave followed in its wake. Casper had made his confession, but the complications were just beginning. They hadn't even begun to face the consequences of his decision, the storm that would inevitably follow. Casper was no longer the man he had been when he left. He was successful, wealthy, powerful. But none of that mattered when it came to his family, the Caldwell dynasty that was teetering on the brink of collapse. Olya had seen the tension in his eyes when he spoke about his company, Caldwell Tech. She knew there were things he hadn't said, things he was hiding behind his strong, confident exterior. When they finally sat down together in his office one evening, a rare moment of peace between them, Casper looked at her, his face hardening with resolve. "There's something you need to know," he said, his voice low. "It's not just me anymore, Olya. My family. My company is in danger. The Langleys. They've cut their investment. They're pulling out." Olya's stomach dropped. She had heard whispers of the Langley family's power, but hearing it from Casper made the reality hit hard. The truth was much worse than she could have imagined. "They've been our biggest investor for years," Casper continued, rubbing his temples as if the weight of the world had suddenly fallen on him. "Victor Langley has threatened to pull his support unless I marry Catherine. This isn't just about us anymore, Olya. It's about everything I've built, my family's future." Olya could see the torment in his eyes, the conflict that was pulling at him. It was a struggle she knew all too well, the pain of being forced to choose between love and duty. She had made her choice when he left her all those years ago, but now she was back in the middle of a situation that was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. Her heart twisted as she listened to him, but at the same time, there was a part of her that understood. He had to choose his family. She'd spent years hating him for leaving, but now she could see that his choices hadn't been easy. Still, it didn't make the pain any less sharp. The wounds they had both carried were deep, and the more she understood about his world, the more she realized just how little she had truly known about the pressure he had been under. But even so, the anger bubbled inside her. How could he have left her like that? How could he have let her go? Casper watched her closely, his eyes searching her face as if trying to decipher what she was thinking. "Olya, I know this isn't fair," he said, his voice quieter now. "I never wanted to hurt you. I made mistakes, but I'm trying to fix them. I need you more than ever, but I can't do this alone." His words, filled with regret and urgency, softened the edges of the resentment she had been holding on to, but it wasn't enough to heal the hurt. Not yet. Olya turned away from him, her gaze drifting out the window to the darkening sky. "What do you want me to do, Casper? Do you expect me to just forget everything? To let you back into my life like nothing ever happened?" Casper took a step toward her, his hand reaching out, but Olya pulled back, the physical distance matching the emotional one between them. "I can't ask you to forget, I know that's impossible," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to try. I want to rebuild everything we lost. I need you to trust me, Olya. To believe that I'm here now, and that I'm not going anywhere." She wanted to believe him. She did believe him, but the road ahead was still unclear, and the truth of the situation, his family's collapsing empire, the pressure to marry Catherine, the looming threat of Victor Langley, felt like an insurmountable wall standing between them. As the days passed, the weight of their situation became more real. Casper's world was falling apart in ways she hadn't expected, and with every phone call he made to investors, every late-night meeting he attended, she felt further removed from the man she had once known. Olya tried to focus on the work she had to do, but the cracks in their relationship were starting to show. They spent more time apart, each of them buried in their own problems, and Olya felt a growing sense of unease. She couldn't ignore the feeling that something was slipping through their fingers, something that she wasn't sure they could get back. One evening, Casper came to her with a look in his eyes that she couldn't ignore. "Victor Langley's pulled the final straw," he said, his voice low and full of exhaustion. "He's threatening to withdraw his entire $10 million investment if I don't marry Catherine. Caldwell Tech is done for. And that means everything else is too. My family, the company. I can't let it all fall apart. Olya, you have to understand." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had known this was coming, but hearing it so plainly, so painfully, made her realize just how much was at stake. She couldn't stand the idea of him sacrificing everything for his family's business. But at the same time, she couldn't blame him. It was his responsibility. But her heart ached as she realized how much they had both lost, and how little time they had left to make things right. "Casper," Olya said, her voice trembling with a mix of frustration and sorrow. "This isn't just about business. You're asking me to be part of a world I don't understand. A world where love takes a backseat to everything else. I can't be that person for you." "I'm not asking you to be someone you're not," Casper replied, his hand gripping hers tightly. "I'm asking you to trust me, to be with me even if everything else falls apart. Because without you, Olya, I'm nothing. I've learned that the hard way. You're the one thing I never should have let go." His words were filled with raw emotion. But Olya wasn't sure it was enough. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe in the possibility of them again. But as long as the storm was raging outside their door, she wasn't sure how they could weather it together. The storm was coming, and they both knew it. Casper's world was crumbling around him, and Olya's heart was caught in the middle. Would they survive the storm, or would it tear them apart once again? Only time would tell. The nights had grown longer, and the weight of everything pressing down on them was heavier than ever. Olya could feel the tension between her and Casper every time they were in the same room. The silent understanding that their time was running out. The stakes were high, and every decision felt like it could be their last chance to turn everything around. Casper had laid it all out for her. Victor Langley's ultimatum, the near collapse of Caldwell Tech, the family's future teetering on the edge. Yet, the more Olya learned, the clearer it became. Casper was facing a battle he could never win alone, and neither could she. She had built her life around being in control, around creating beauty and perfection for others. But now, the reality was different. She couldn't control the outside forces, couldn't manipulate the way she could with her events. She couldn't change Victor Langley's cold demands, nor could she fix Casper's broken legacy with the wave of a hand. Still, as she sat at the desk in her apartment late one evening, the glow of the city lights filtering through the window, Olya realized something. She couldn't sit back and watch him destroy himself. She couldn't watch him make the same mistakes again. Casper had been consumed by the pressure of his family's collapse, the looming financial ruin. But Olya saw a different path. It wasn't about fighting with Victor Langley, not directly at least. It was about fighting for Caldwell Tech's soul, for its vision, for everything Casper had built. He had spent so many years making deals, growing his company, but now, the real battle was about holding on to that vision, to what Caldwell Tech stood for. The longer she thought about it, the clearer the answer became. If they were going to get through this, they needed to show the world who they truly were. They needed to rebrand. They needed to remind the world, and themselves, why Caldwell Tech existed in the first place. The plan began to take shape in her mind, slow at first, but then picking up momentum. Olya wasn't just a wedding planner. She was a storyteller, a master of spectacle. She could craft the perfect event out of chaos, could transform the most mundane setting into something magical. It was time to use those skills for something bigger. They needed an event, a spectacle, something that would turn heads, get the press talking, and attract new investors who believed in the future of Caldwell Tech, not just its current struggles. She didn't have time to waste. She needed to act fast, and so did Casper. The next morning, she called him, her voice steady but filled with an energy she hadn't felt in days. "Casper, I've been thinking," she began, "and I think I know what we need to do." Casper, exhausted from another sleepless night, was silent for a moment before answering, his voice hoarse. "What are you thinking, Olya?" His words were tinged with both hope and skepticism, as if he wasn't sure if this was another of her elaborate plans or something that could actually save them. She could hear the edge of doubt in his voice, but that only fueled her resolve. "We need to rebrand Caldwell Tech. Not just a simple overhaul, but a complete reinvention. A showcase of our innovation, of the technology we've been working on, of the future we're building. We need a launch event. A big one. Something that will grab the world's attention." There was a pause on the other end, and Olya could almost hear Casper processing her words. "You're talking about a press event?" he finally asked, his voice uncertain. "It's more than that," she replied. "This is about reclaiming Caldwell Tech's identity. It's not just about investors. It's about showing the world who we are, what we stand for, and why Caldwell Tech will survive. We're not just a company on the edge of collapse. We're a force that's just getting started. It's time to remind them of that." As she spoke, Olya could feel the excitement beginning to build within her. Casper was quiet, but she could tell he was listening, weighing her words. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "I don't know, Olya. Victor's not going to be impressed by a fancy event. He doesn't care about innovation or vision. He wants control." Olya's jaw tightened as she spoke, her voice unwavering. "Victor Langley can't control what he doesn't understand. And the more we try to appease him, the more he'll take. We need to take control of this narrative. We need to show everyone that Caldwell Tech is bigger than any one investor. And we'll do it together." There was a moment of silence, and then Casper spoke again, his tone softened by something new, a sense of belief. "All right, let's do it. Let's show them what we're made of." From that moment on, everything shifted. Olya threw herself into the planning with the kind of fervor she had only ever applied to the most important events. She had a vision now, one that felt more urgent, more important than anything she had ever orchestrated. She knew how to make things unforgettable. The event would be more than a product launch. It would be a statement. The world had to see that Caldwell Tech wasn't just about wealth. It was about innovation, integrity, and a future that wasn't tied to a man's money or power. The venue was chosen, a sprawling warehouse space on the edge of the city, unassuming yet perfect for what she had in mind. Drones would project the Caldwell Tech logo across the night sky. Giant, immersive screens would showcase their most recent breakthroughs, their newest technology, with lights pulsing in time to the music. A perfect marriage of innovation and spectacle. The guests would feel as if they were stepping into the future itself, not just attending another corporate event. The world would see Caldwell Tech as it truly was, not a company in crisis, but a company on the brink of greatness. As Olya worked tirelessly on the details, Casper became more and more involved, his mind shifting from the weight of his family's pressure to the excitement of the project they were building together. He wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was a partner, someone with a vision and a passion for Caldwell Tech's future. For the first time since the storm had hit, Olya saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. They were in this together, fighting side by side, and for the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. The event date drew closer, and Olya couldn't shake the feeling that everything was hanging in the balance. They had to get this right. There was no room for failure. If they didn't pull this off, they would lose everything. But as she stood in front of the massive screens during a final rehearsal, the excitement in the air almost palpable. Olya knew one thing for sure. She would fight for this. She would fight for Casper. She would fight for Caldwell Tech. And she wouldn't stop until they were standing together at the top, no matter what it took. This was more than just a business battle. It was a battle for their future, for the love that had never truly faded, and for the life they both still wanted. Olya's resolve had never been clearer. They were ready to fight. The night of the launch event had arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. The vast warehouse was a spectacle of lights, music, and technology, an embodiment of the vision that Casper and Olya had worked tirelessly to bring to life. The drones hovered in the sky, casting the Caldwell Tech logo in vivid, glowing colors, while sleek screens displayed the company's most innovative advancements. The guests, high-profile investors, and tech enthusiasts from all over the world, were mesmerized by the immersive experience. Olya stood at the edge of the room, her eyes scanning the crowd, her heart racing. They had done it. She had done it. She had transformed a chaotic crisis into an unforgettable moment. But even as the event unfolded perfectly, she could feel the weight of what loomed on the horizon. They were far from out of danger. Casper had been moving through the crowd with ease, his face a mask of professionalism. But Olya could see the subtle tension in his jaw, the way his eyes flicked nervously to the door every time a new guest arrived. Victor Langley, the man who could single-handedly tear everything they had built apart, was nowhere to be seen, but his presence loomed large. Olya had known from the moment they began this fight that the real battle would come when Victor made his move. He had already pulled his initial investment. He had threatened to destroy Caldwell Tech, and the ultimatum had always hung over them like a guillotine. She had tried to forget about him, tried to focus on the future, but tonight, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real test was yet to come. As the evening wore on, Casper finally caught her gaze across the room. There was something different in his expression now: hope, excitement, and a subtle shift in his posture. Olya smiled, but the moment was fleeting. A familiar, chilling voice broke through the buzz of conversation. "Casper!" Victor Langley's voice was like a cold wind, cutting through the warmth of the room. Olya's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen him arrive, but his presence was undeniable. He stood near the entrance, his imposing figure casting a long shadow. His expensive suit, his polished demeanor, everything about him screamed power. Catherine stood beside him, her eyes scanning the room, her posture stiff and cold. It was as if the entire atmosphere shifted with their arrival. Casper stiffened as well, his face tightening, but he did not approach immediately. Olya could see the internal struggle playing out in him, the war between his loyalty to his family and his desire to break free from the shackles that had bound him for so long. But this wasn't just about business anymore. It wasn't just about the company. It was about everything: the love they had lost, the future they were fighting to rebuild, and the family ties that threatened to strangle them both. Olya walked toward Casper, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor, and he met her halfway. There was a brief moment of silence between them, a space where everything felt suspended in time. Victor's voice broke the quiet, his words filled with venom. "You really think this will work, Casper?" His eyes gleamed with disdain as he glanced around the room, taking in the spectacle with a bemused smile. "You think this flashy event is going to change anything? You've made your choice and you've lost. I hold the strings now, and I will pull them until there's nothing left for you." Olya could feel the tension between them, the hostility that had existed for years. But now, it felt even more palpable, like the final piece in a long, painful puzzle. Casper took a deep breath, his voice calm but firm as he replied, "You don't own me, Victor. And you don't own this company. Caldwell Tech will thrive, with or without you. The choice is yours." His words were like a challenge, a defiance that Olya hadn't heard from him in years. It was the man she had once known, the man who fought for what he believed in, the man who was willing to risk it all. Victor's smile faltered, just for a moment, before he regained his composure. "You think the world is watching? You think this little show is going to change your fate?" he scoffed, his eyes narrowing. "I've already pulled my money from Caldwell Tech. I've already arranged for your rivals to take what you've built. Your vision means nothing without the financial backing to support it." Olya could feel the coldness of his words, the certainty in his voice. But she had heard enough. She stepped forward, her voice steady and unwavering as she addressed Victor. "You've never understood what Caldwell Tech is truly about, Victor. It's not just about money. It's about innovation, about vision, about creating something that lasts beyond the bottom line." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment it felt as though time itself had stopped. Casper's gaze flicked to her, his expression unreadable. But there was something there, something deeper than just the business, something she had longed for since the moment they had first crossed paths again. Victor's face twisted into a sneer. "Vision? You're living in a fantasy world, Olya. You'll see. When this all collapses, you'll understand that I was right." He turned to Casper, his eyes piercing. "As for you, you've made your bed. Now lie in it." Olya could feel the anger rising within her, but she fought to keep it in check. She couldn't let Victor get under her skin, not now. This was their moment. They had worked too hard, fought too long to let someone like him destroy everything they had built. Casper stepped forward, his eyes locking with Victor's. "You've underestimated me, Victor," he said quietly, but the words were heavy with meaning. "You've underestimated us. Caldwell Tech isn't about money. It's about what we create, what we give to the world. And I'm not going to let you tear it down just because you think you have the power." He turned back to Olya, his eyes softer now, filled with the kind of resolve she hadn't seen in him in years. "This is our fight, Olya. Together." For the first time since they had started this journey, Olya felt a sense of certainty settle within her. She had been waiting for the right moment, waiting for Casper to find his strength again, and now he had. They weren't fighting just for the company anymore. They were fighting for their future, for everything they had lost, and everything they still hoped to build. As Casper and Olya stood side by side, facing Victor and Catherine, the tension in the air was palpable. But there was something else, too, a sense of power, a feeling that they had crossed a line, that they had taken control of their own fate. And in that moment, Olya knew that no matter what Victor did next, they had already won. The fight wasn't over yet, but it was no longer about survival. It was about something much more important, about the life they were choosing to build together. The aftermath of the confrontation with Victor Langley had left Olya and Casper with a sense of victory. But the battle wasn't over yet. They had stood firm, shoulder to shoulder, in the face of the man who had once threatened to dismantle everything they had worked for. And now, as the night settled in around them, the weight of the challenge they faced was still heavy. But there was a quiet sense of something else beginning to emerge. It was hope. It was the possibility of a future that wasn't dictated by family ties, by money, or by the past. The event they had orchestrated had been a success. Caldwell Tech's rebranding had drawn attention. New investors were showing interest, and the tide had started to turn in their favor. But amidst the whirlwind of business, the real reason they were standing together was clearer than ever. It was because they had found something worth fighting for, something deeper than profit or power. The following days were filled with tension, but it wasn't the kind that had plagued them before. There was a different kind of weight now, one that came from the uncertainty of their future and the fragile balance they had created. Casper spent more time in meetings with his team, renegotiating contracts, smoothing over the damage Victor Langley had caused. Olya remained by his side, guiding him with her unwavering support, helping him to see the bigger picture as they faced the fallout of his decisions. For the first time, he wasn't alone in the fight, and that made all the difference. Their relationship, once defined by pain and unspoken words, had slowly shifted into something new, something worth nurturing. It was on one of those nights, a few weeks after the event, that Casper took Olya's hand as they stood at the edge of the beach where their journey had begun. The same beach that had witnessed their pain and their reconciliation. The stars overhead twinkled like diamonds against the dark canvas of the sky, their light soft and distant, yet constant. Casper's grip tightened around her fingers as he turned toward her, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that spoke volumes. There was no need for words in this moment. There was only the quiet understanding between them, the acknowledgement of everything they had overcome, and everything that still lay ahead. "Olya," he began, his voice hushed. "I've spent my life building things, creating things, but none of it has ever felt as real as this." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of years spent in silence, years of mistakes and regrets. "I've tried so hard to make things right, to fix what I broke, but I realize now that the only thing I needed to fix was myself, and the only thing I've ever really wanted, the only thing that's ever truly mattered, is you." Olya's heart fluttered in her chest, but she held his gaze, steady and unwavering. It was as if everything she had felt in the moments they had shared on this beach, the confusion, the anger, the longing, had finally found its resolution. She had feared so much about this moment, feared that the past would tear them apart again. But here, beneath the stars, she realized how much stronger they were because of everything they had been through. "I never stopped loving you, Casper," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But I needed to see if we could rebuild something stronger than what we had before. I needed to see if I could trust you again." Casper smiled softly, his thumb brushing against her knuckles, a gesture so familiar it made her chest ache. "You don't have to trust me, Olya. You don't have to forgive me, not yet. But I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere." Olya swallowed the lump in her throat as she looked out at the ocean, the waves crashing gently against the shore. She had spent so much time trying to move on from the past, trying to build a life that didn't depend on Casper. But the truth was, she had never really let go. The love they had shared had never truly faded. It had been buried, hidden beneath layers of time and pain. But it was still there. And now, as she stood beside him, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers, she knew she was ready to let that love grow again, to let it blossom into something new. The moment stretched on, the silence between them comforting rather than awkward, as if they had always belonged here, together, standing side by side beneath the night sky. Finally, Casper spoke again, his voice tinged with a quiet intensity. "Olya, will you marry me?" His words, though simple, felt like a promise that spanned the years, a commitment to everything they had yet to build. "I don't have a ring, but I have my heart, and that's all I can give you." Olya's breath caught in her throat as she turned toward him, her heart racing in her chest. He had asked her in the most unassuming way, without fanfare or grand gestures, but the sincerity in his eyes made her feel as though the universe had conspired to bring them back together, to allow them this chance at happiness. She had been so afraid of what the future might hold, so afraid of opening herself up again, but in this moment, with him by her side, she realized that love was never meant to be controlled, never meant to be held back. It was something to be embraced, even in its imperfect form. "Yes," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but it was enough. "Yes, I will marry you, Casper. Let's build a future together, one that's stronger than anything we've had before." The relief in his eyes was palpable, And before she could say another word, he pulled her close, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepening as they both gave in to the overwhelming emotions that had been building between them. The world around them seemed to disappear in that moment, leaving only the two of them, their hearts beating in time with the rhythm of the ocean. As they pulled away, their foreheads touching, Casper smiled, a smile that reached his eyes, making them shimmer with joy. "We're going to be all right, Olya. I promise you, we're going to be all right." And as they stood there, under the stars that had witnessed their trials and triumphs, Olya knew that everything had led them to this moment. The pain, the heartache, the uncertainty. It had all led them to this love, this second chance. Together, they would face whatever came next, hand in hand, with hearts that had been tested but were stronger than ever before. The future was theirs to create, and with each step they took, the stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, a little clearer, as if to say that this was forever. Thank you so much for joining us on this unforgettable journey with Olya and Casper. Their story of love, redemption, and second chances shows us that no matter how many obstacles we face, it's never too late to fight for what we truly want. We'd love to hear your thoughts on their journey. Did their rekindled love inspire you? What do you think about the choices they made? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more stories that will tug at your heartstrings. Until next time, take care, keep dreaming, and never stop believing in love. See you soon.